introduction to Sandy.
Okay.
Hey everyone, welcome. This is Zoomtime Knowledge, a free public lecture series provided by the James Madison University Lifelong Learning Institute. Today's presentation is going to be how to spot fake news, and we're glad to welcome Sandy Parks, who was a librarian with the Harrisonburg City Schools for 29 years until her retirement this past July. Sandy is a nationally board certified teacher, holds a master's degree in library science from the University of North Carolina, and she's also known for taking a photo or two that highlights the beauty of the valley. Sandy, I do want to, in addition to saying welcome, I want to thank you for presenting on this timely topic. I know that we've had you back again from last year. We offered this around the same timing. But I think this is a perfect time to offer a presentation like this when so much information is coming out daily with the events that are happening in the world. And as we head into election season, those of us who are remaining at home, we're likely finding more and more information, maybe more than we usually do online. So thank you for helping us evaluate the information we find. I know you're going to share information about various news sources and where we could maybe find alternate information if we find that our news sources lean to the left or right, something that might be a bit more neutral and balance our opinions of matters that we hear about reported on the news. So Sandy, thank you, welcome, and I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us today.
I should be unmuted. And so welcome. I'm excited to be back here talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which is information literacy. And having a almost 30-year career, I know that has changed since I started teaching in '91. The whole information landscape changed. So when I talk to kids, I would often tell them, you need to go home and teach your parents and your grandparents this, because I know we didn't teach it when I had them as students. So a little bit of housekeeping here. I do need to introduce my puppy because, as you all know, working from home can have challenges. And this is my 3-month-old puppy, and he's almost house trained, but if he says he needs to go out, sorry, I'm going to have to get up and let him out. But he is adorable. So back to the presentation. Fake news and how to spot it. Now we're going to touch on a lot of things. I have linked a lot of my sources and there's a full bibliography at the end so that you can follow through. So fake news has always been around. I know I grew up seeing the Weekly World News in the in the grocery store. We would buy it for a camping trip to have a good laugh about it. So it's always been around. And it used to refer to false information, but the term fake news has actually been co-opted to dismiss news that a person doesn't like. And so we're going to use some other vocabulary of types of fake news. First being misinformation, and that is information that is incorrect, but not on purpose. Somebody gives you the wrong directions. Inadvertently wrong. Disinformation is deliberately wrong. Somebody knows what is the truth and writes something else. And then there's propaganda. And propaganda is information that has an agenda. It's not necessarily false, but its purpose is to persuade. So oftentimes with propaganda, you will find that maybe not the whole story is being given. There was an image I was looking for last night, and I knew I had it in my files somewhere. When I was in London a couple of years ago, the British Library had a exhibit on propaganda, and on the side of the British Library there was that Uncle Sam wants you, and that's what they were using as their example of propaganda. So different types of fake news to keep an eye out: misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda. So why does this whole problem seem worse? Um, when we only got our information from print, that was the evaluation procedure. Things that were in print had been through an editor, they had been reviewed. And there was also a time lag for things to be corrected. Now we have a glut of information, so much stuff at our fingertips. I used to have teachers who would fight over a set of old, a 6-year-old set of encyclopedias to have in their room, and now they have an up-to-date one that the kids can get to at home as well. But with this glut of information, as a management strategy, we tend to limit ourselves to our own filter bubbles and echo chambers, things that match up with what we already know. And we'll talk about bias in a few minutes. But we also have the ability to share instantly. And sometimes that instantly takes away that process of review. And so things go viral before they've had a chance for anybody to fact check. We also have the deliberate targeting of misinformation, and particularly in our election year by Russia. That link actually goes to the Senate report about Russian targeting of our election procedure and deliberately sowing misinformation through social media. So that is a known problem, and so everybody has to have their defenses up. Now, maybe a sign of the times that some of the best advice comes from, yes, stake 'em. And what they say in this Twitter thread is to be very careful not to mistake anecdotes or stories with data. That data is based on controlled variables, meta-analysis, and the scientific process. And so people who are throwing those anecdotes into the mix lead us down a troubled path. And it can be difficult to know what to believe when institutional trust is diminished. So their point is to look for credentials. And so Steakum actually is an interesting Twitter follow because they do have some handy tips, but they also recognize we're a frozen meat brand posting ads inevitably made to, and I can't read that, something people, and generate sales. So this is peak anecdote or peak irony. So they're asking us to make informed decisions. Look for the credentials. Who or what is providing information? And yes, that's in all caps. And I think, online, when you type something in all caps, it usually means you're shouting. So I'll stop shouting now, but it really is that important to know who or what is providing the information. Now, there's a lot of different ways to, or systems that you can use to evaluate information. And so there's a lot of different acronyms. Now, I do come from a middle school background, so this is one I use because you use the word crap and you get a chuckle out of middle school. But you know what? If you get a chuckle out of them, then they have a chance of remembering it. And so as you are working with any information, you want to look at currency. Is this, when was this published? Can you tell when this is published? Is it relevant? Is it accurate? Now, how can you, as an ordinary citizen, know perhaps what scientific information is accurate or not. Um, and we'll talk about some techniques there. The authority, those credentials, who is putting up this information? I had a website for, oh, it was around 12, 13 years on my Harrisonburg High School site that said the moon is made of green cheese. Nobody ever told me to take that website down. And I use that as an example. I, of course, didn't have my name on it. So we couldn't tell what the authority was. We couldn't tell what the currency was. And what was the purpose? The kids finally eventually did conclude that it was for, humor. Um, but run things through the crap test. If you don't like that one, you could use the 5 W's that you might have learned with newspaper articles. Who, what, when, where, why. Those type of things, to stop and think about those things. And you might remember in school when your teacher said you had to check 3 sources, and everybody thought it was dumb. Why do we have to check 3 sources? I have the one I have right here. And that's a technique called triangulation, to see if your sources agree with each other. And if you can find 3 sources that agree with each other, then the information can be considered verified, as long as they're not in a circle of citing each other. So you might hear triangulation, you might hear the term lateral reading, where you are checking other sources to see if it matches up. Now, where do we get our news? Radio, television, newspapers, print and online, and then we add in social media. And some of the research I found really was interesting, and I get a lot of Washington Post articles through my Facebook feed. And so I thought I was doing pretty good. However, you do have to realize that that is a feed. It is being fed to you. And those articles, while reliable, aren't showing me the whole picture. So people who get most of their knowledge via social media are less knowledgeable about current events and have been exposed to, the study showed that they were exposed to, more misinformation and conspiracy theories. So radio, television, and newspapers, those are some of our more traditional sources, even if they are available online. That's a convenience. Makes things more accessible. We can divide sources into mainstream versus alternative media. And a lot of trash talk has been sent towards the mainstream media. And so what is the mainstream media? They are media organizations whose financial interest is to appeal to the broadest range of people, as opposed to your alternative that have a small following that may be seeking a unique viewpoint, may be interested in climate change, and so articles would be more geared towards climate change. But the mainstream also has more resources. The alternative may be changing the status, challenging the status quo and the social norms. Thing I find with mainstream media is that all reputable organizations will subscribe to some kind of code of conduct or ethics. The NPR one is the most complete one. There is a list on this News Leaders Association that links to all of these different newspapers and what their goal is. What do they aspire to do? What are their own rules? Do they fall down sometimes? Yes, but they have those goals, and that makes them obligated to also post corrections. Whoops, not ready for that yet. So the alternative news may break important stories, but the public will tend to wait until the mainstream media picks it up. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because the mainstream media also has the resources to do the fact checking. We as a public, when we see something that needs to be fact checked, we can, you know, make more noise about it until it is followed in the mainstream media. Remember, they're looking for the broadest range of people. Now, the question to ask about all of these, and I personally recommend looking at both, because of that important, challenging status quo and social norms of getting information out. But we do have to recognize what is the bias in any of these organizations. Now, bias, dictionary.com does define as a tendency, trend, inclination, feeling, or opinion that is preconceived or unreasoned. What we lean towards. We all have bias. Any news organization has a bias. And any website, which is ultimately created by a human, also has some kind of bias. And so the trick is learning to recognize that bias while also dealing with confirmation bias. Now, I'll confess that I first heard the term confirmation bias when some friends named their band Confirmation Bias, and I said, what's that? But it's a tendency to look for information that supports what we already believe, that confirms our belief. And so that keeps us in that little filter bubble that we keep going around, and you don't see outside of that bubble. So that confirmation bias is something that we all really do need to be aware of, and seek out diverse viewpoints. Keep clicking the wrong thing. And this article from the News Literacy Project that was linked is actually a really good one to go back to and read, as well as I will give a shout out to this News Literacy Project. They have a lot of really good articles and some fun little quizzes, and lots of resources for educators to help teach media literacy. So with that bias, it's difficult sometimes to pick it up on your own. And so using tools that can tell us or give us some information about a particular source. One that I'll use a lot is Media Bias Fact Check. And this one can be a little annoying with ads, but your box up here gives you a way to search. And there was a news story that broke last night that is an interesting case study for what we're looking at. And this was the news story that immigrants in a detention center in Georgia were forcibly given hysterectomies. The story was first shared by my sister, who did at least say, if this is true, it's horrific. But the story was originally published in a journal called Law and Crime. I'm not personally familiar with the journal. So my first, this hides part of my window. There we go. There's my search window. Come on. So what this tells me about this journal is that it is slightly moderate or slightly liberal. However, this was what I wanted to know, was that for factual reporting, it is rated very high. And in the information down below, it does, say what caused that rating. So it gives you more information there. So that's a way to find a little bit more information about a source that you may not be familiar with. And this rating actually, I gave that story more credence based on that. The other place it was first reported was Yahoo. And so I definitely wanted more information. The next really good source for checking for bias and reliability is this Ad Fontes. And this is an interactive chart. And I know when you first look at this, it looks like a big jumble. How to make sense of this. But as a chart, you have up on the top, most left is on this side. Things that are biased towards the right are on the right side. And then in level, you have reliability. The ones up on the top are the most reliable, and the ones down on the bottom are the least reliable. And then they have boxes that categorize the sources. So this green box up here is the most reliable for news. And then your next box is most reliable for news, but also has a lot of analysis and opinion. Down here on the bottom, you've got your serious reliability issues and or extremism. You can make it larger. So to see those sources that are up on the top, that would be the most reliable. And the AP actually is way up there. The Weather Channel is pretty good, which is good. NPR and BBC, Bloomberg. Wall Street Journal leans right, but has a high reliability for factual. If that is so overwhelming, you can also search for a particular source, and it will give you the rating there. So this has, if you go to the site, they have a fascinating description of their methodology. Sorry, I live in Bridgewater, real close to the airport. Okay, plane gone. So this can be another really good place to look to find out, is that source that somebody is sharing, is that a reliable source of information? What do we know about it? Where does it lean? Now, another site that is real handy is this All Sides. And they will look at news. And I'm looking at my puppy. Hold on a sec. Porter. So they're looking at the news, and they will show you the same news article and how different news organizations will publish that, will present that. So from the center, and you see how headlines can be written differently to try to make people, interpret a news article. And so All Sides can be a really good way to break out of your own bubble and to look at how things are being covered. You can track the same story through there. Hold on. Porter, get back here. Porter! Porter! No!
Cindy will be right back with us. She did mention at the beginning the reason she introduced Porter was she said she needed to keep a close eye on him.
Okay, puppy escape is now over. Sorry about that. Life with puppy is interesting. Okay, so all sides now. And again, a good site to prowl through. And there's a static of Advantes that I put in just in case the interactive one didn't come up. This I found to be a really good example of the all sides, looking at a report from Black Lives Matter demonstrations. And you can see how, from the headlines, how different news organizations presented them differently. There are fact-checking sites, and I saw one question in the chat that, is there an app that will do it automatically? Not that I am aware of, although this NewsGuard down here was one that I actually just discovered this morning. And I discovered that there is an extension that NewsGuard will provide that you can use for the reliability. I, however, decided it was not a good thing to install that an hour before a presentation. So that could be worth checking out. But known sites for fact checking: PolitiFact, Fact Check, the Washington Post Fact Checker, Snopes. For things of global news is AFP Fact Check. And another one I found this morning that was actually through the Media Bias Fact Check. This gives a daily update of things that have been in the news. And this is an international fact-checking network that is a reliable organization. And so just things that were going around in the last day or so. They went through and fact-checked. So for your daily fact check, that might not be a bad thing to check into. PolitiFact is probably one of the best. And so I believe it is searchable. Yeah, there's your search button. So I don't think we're going to have time to really look at all of these. Post Fact Checker also runs, going back there, the running tally of Trump falsehoods. Snopes is one of the ones that is most well known. One of the things I really like about Snopes, and this is something to keep an eye out for, what makes Snopes any better than any of us in knowing whether or not something is actually true? And so as you go down and read through, they give the background on the issue. There are also links, but they also include their sources. Where did they get their information? And that's a mark of good research, when you can track through the sources. And so they're not just making the claim, but they're backing it up with evidence. So when you have that evidence that you can look at, you can make your own conclusion. So Snopes. How are we doing on time? Okay. Fake images are a big thing, because with Photoshop, it became very easy to manipulate images. One of the most famous ones is the one on the right here, that was published in 2017, when I think it was Hurricane Harvey, yeah. And so there's sharks on the interstate in Houston. And it went all over the place. Within 3 days, the creator said, you can stop retweeting it now. And he talks about how he manipulated that image, and people believed it. The one on the left is a little bit more recent, and showing a massive protest against COVID-19 restrictions in Germany. Let me click on that one. And so this is one where they took a picture of a parade in Switzerland and said it was something else. And, that again was shared a lot of times. So what do we do about pictures? How can we know if they are reliable or not? And this does take a little bit of work. Some of the do-it-yourself tools, there are 2 sites I know of to start with. Google image search. You can actually upload a picture and it will tell you where else it has appeared on the web. And that was the way that this one was discovered. Somebody, ran it through there. It's like, hold it, that was in Switzerland, 2 years ago. That can't be a protest. So the location and the date didn't match up. You can also look for things that don't match in a picture. Anything that might date it, anything that just doesn't quite look right. You really do need to have your, I'll call your spidey sense on. This is a good article on some technique, but really what it comes down to is the credibility of your source. And, Twitter does not, except in extreme cases, does not do fact checking, and Facebook does even less. And so things can be shared very easily that way. So before you share it, if you want to stop that chain, you can check to see if there is more information about it before it continues. Deep fakes or altered videos. These can also be very cleverly done, very slightly edited to change the meaning of that. And so for my information here, I have a tweet from John Silva, who's also an NBCT, National Board Certified Teacher. But he linked to 3 manipulated videos that were designed to spread political information. And I'm going to click on that tweet so we can look at it a little bit more. First thing I want to point out is, who is this guy and why? What are his credentials? Well, he's the senior director of the News Literacy Project, which is the site I told you about earlier. So when I saw that, I felt very comfortable with his level of information. So the first video was one between Adi Barkan and Joe Biden. And this is one where the subject of the video spoke up himself. Second one, and that was a video where it appeared like Joe Biden had fallen asleep in an interview. Well, the person who was also in there spoke up. And so by doing what we call lateral reading, of checking a few keywords from a video, and then there's another one that edited. So John Silva's how do we verify videos? It's not as simple as a reverse image search. And he says, open a new browser tab, begin searching keywords from the video and looking for fact check or news reports. It's not going to hurt anyone if you wait a couple of hours before sharing that video that you are outraged about. Because there are people out there who religiously check these things. And so giving the process a little bit of time can help with the spread of disinformation. Now, check your emotions. And this was one of the tips from John Silva. And remember, information can make us feel certain ways, and particularly if we are being manipulated. So how does it make you feel? Are you so angry you want to share it immediately? Does it make you happy? Humor, or can it be sarcasm or a parody or sad? If a piece of information makes you feel something, then your next thing should be to reflect. Why are you having such a strong reaction? Who benefits from that strong reaction? And what do you know about the information that caused the reaction? And here's the links to the news that broke last night about the immigrant hysterectomies. And when I was working on this at 11:05 last night, there were exactly 2 sources that had reported on it. And that was the Yahoo News and the Law and Crime. And I told you how I, check the bias on Law and Crime. This morning I checked, and what we would consider the mainstream media, Washington Post, New York Times, had still not picked up the story. And so I was wondering, are they still fact checking it? And I'm still wondering. But by 10 o'clock this morning, Vice, The Guardian, and the BBC, who are all highly regarded for factual recording, had also picked up the story. So watching the chain of information and the fact checking that goes along. The other case most recently, The Atlantic published an article in which President Trump talked in derogatory terms about our military, which is a pretty inflammatory accusation. And so you watched as one by one other major news organizations didn't publish the story, didn't repeat it until they had done their own fact checking. I think the Post was first, in the New York Times, and then Fox News also indicated that their sources verified that information. And so checking to make sure that things have been verified by sources that you trust and that you understand what the bias of those sources are. The illusory truth effect of dealing with misinformation. And this links to a research study that the more times that something is repeated, the more likely it will be believed. Even if you know it's false, the more times that you hear it, the more it starts to sink in and become plausible. And we see this a lot. So recommendation of dealing with this effect is to try not to repeat the lie. And that's tough. But if you start with, because we're all outraged by an untruth, so try not to repeat that falsehood even while you're debunking it, or start with the facts. Sky is blue. But I heard such and such say it was red, but really that the sky is blue because science proves it. So that's what we call a truth sandwich. We acknowledge the lie in the middle, but we led with the truth and we ended with the truth. So that is what sticks in people's minds. And there is also a link to that study if you're interested. Now, if we were in person, I'd have you raise your hand to see if you had encountered that. You have read your last free article from the New York Times and trying to follow an article that you really want to find. Because when we're talking about diverse sources and access to information, there is a saying that you get what you pay for. There's a lot of free information, but to have reporters on the scene, to have these verification, it costs money. But not all of us can afford to subscribe to the New York Times, Washington Post, the LA Times, all of these. But this is where your library can come to the rescue. The Massanutten Regional Library, just in the last 2 months, picked up subscriptions to the New York Times and the Washington Post for all of us. And so if you have a library card, you have access to those, and you don't have to have that dreaded, you have read your last free article. They also have Daily News Record archives from '93, and Newsbank will allow you to get to a lot of other local and national newspapers. So there are a lot of online resources that you can access to get more background information on that thing that somebody shared on Facebook. What's the background of it, of using these kinds of sources? Trolls and bots. I'm sure we would love to believe that everybody we are interacting with online is real and pure of purpose. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And so this is the best distinction between trolls and bots and what they are. A troll is a real person, but their main job, their main mission in life is to get an emotional reaction from you. They will often post inflammatory things of just sowing disinformation. Now, the bot is more insidious, not a real person. And there are whole bot farms, and I'm not sure I completely understand this, except that I know that there are some people out there with less than pure purposes. They want to distort. And if you are interested, this article is linked that gives more information on exactly what they are and how to identify them. Now, to review, how to spot fake news. And I will point out, this graphic is available and that you can download, plaster it all over the place, because we need to keep reminding people of this. We talked about considering the source. What kind of information can you find about it? One example I use is the dihydrogen monoxide website that is a bogus site. And when you click on the About, it says, hey, this is a joke. What is the last time you checked on the About section of a website? So considering the source, but also, looking down here, checking the bias of it, checking the reliability. What information can you find about it? Who's the author? Do they have the credentials to talk about what they're talking about? We all know the example of a doctor of philosophy. Do you want them to be taking out your appendix? Is their credentials in the field in which they are addressing? Date, currency is important. Checking your biases. Your confirmation bias, does that affect what you believe? And if you find something is outrageous, that's the time to do some more research. Headlines are designed to get you to read the article, to get you to click on them. They are often sensational. They can be infuriating at times. A good article or website will have supporting sources. Click on the links and see if the info actually supports the story. Now, Wikipedia is one of the sites that comes up very often when you do an internet search. And there have been various things said about Wikipedia over the years. Don't use it, it's crowdsourced. But actually, the main reason to consider why you use it is an encyclopedia, which means it is the base level of information. It's not the in-depth. However, there are some really good articles on Wikipedia. How can you tell? Go down to the bottom, look at the references. I'll often follow through on the references to get more information about a source. And if somebody can support what they are, the information that they are presenting, that gives it credibility, that gives it authority. And so you can also use this in your information dealings. If somebody shares something, it's okay. And in fact, it's necessary to say, wow, that's interesting. Do you have an article on that? Do you have a source? Where did you get your information? And I have had people say to me when I ask that question of, oh, I saw it on the internet somewhere. Well, saw it on the internet is not an answer. If they have a legitimate point, there will be sources that can support that. And if something is outlandish, it might just be a joke. There are some really clever people with strange senses of humor that sometimes are funny and sometimes they're not. But if something seems too good to be true or too hilarious to be true, double check it. And again, that lateral searching of either taking the image or taking some keywords. And when in doubt, ask the expert. Oops, I just clicked on the F law. So librarians are experts in helping to verify information. I know that our public library, you can contact them through their website or looking at some of the fact-checking websites that we have here. So it can be, I hope it doesn't seem daunting. But knowing where these sites are for checking bias and reliability, that can make it a really just quick check. What is this source? And those fact-checking and bias sites are highly regarded within the industry. So, last couple slides are, sorry, it's librarian in me. I had to put the works cited so that you can, track through on any of the information. So, I hope I haven't completely overwhelmed you. I know it's a lot of information, but it's an interesting world that we live in. We have more access, and with that access also comes responsibility. So, what questions, and I'm going to stop screen sharing for the moment. Okay. And let me look at the chat. Okay. Um, so one of the questions is who determines how and what media organizations skew left and right or center? There is actually on both Advantes and Media Bias Fact Check, if you go to their methodology, they explain the metrics that they use to make that determination. It has to do, the fact checking part is how many times they have had to be corrected. But for the bias part, they're looking at word choice and how sensational and how things are worded in their articles and their article titles. And so they use that. Um, so what extent foreign sources are contributing to fake news? That's a really, really, really good question because it's important information. The Senate report that I linked does indicate that there was a lot of information distortion that came from Russia in the 2016 election. And information about what is happening in this election is not being released at the moment. So, other questions about copy of the PowerPoint? I think the recording will be up later, but if you want can we make the PowerPoint itself available because that has the links embedded in it?
We can, Sandy. So our last presentation also included resources that were clickable. And so that presenter provided us with a copy of their presentation, which we posted online beneath the video link. You can also create a PDF if you wanted, if you didn't want the entire presentation of just the resource links, we could do that as well. Whatever you wish to do, we will post it with the video.
Okay. Good. Yeah, because I know it's a lot of information to try to absorb. And I try to just provide, places that you can go for more information at your leisure. So that social dilemma show, I'll have to check about, looking at that. I did have a weird experience where I could kind of see the rabbit hole of how we are targeted for information. And because I just left Harrisonburg City Schools, I lost access to my Harrisonburg email account and Google account, which my YouTube account had been tied to. So I started with a completely clean YouTube account that had no knowledge of what type of videos that I like to watch. And somebody asked me to watch a video about Black Lives Matter that they knew didn't match up with the way that I had been presenting information about it. And so in fairness, I agreed to watch this video, not even thinking of any repercussions. But then when I went back to YouTube, the suggestions of conspiracy theories and, that were now targeted into my YouTube feed just from watching one video. And it was quite illuminating to me to see, because otherwise it had been all of a jumble of various interests and you can't see it quite as clearly. But that was an eye-opener for me.
Sandy, we have a question from Chris Robin. If you would like to ask your question, go ahead. Your microphone's unmuted.
Yeah, this is Robin McNally. I really don't have a question. This whole thing just reminded me of a very clever statement that Stephen Colbert made several years ago, I think when he was still on Comedy Central, where he says, reality has a liberal bias.
Good one, Robin.
Reality has a liberal bias. Well, when we're in an era where the term alternative facts has actually been presented,
Yeah.
yeah. And that's one of the most dangerous things is the attack on some of our scientific organizations and, information altered for political purposes. Makes it really a shifting shifting surface to stand on. Shoot, that was too many S's. Okay.
And if there are other questions or comments, if you're not seeing the chat window, you do have the ability to unmute your microphone and manage that yourself. Feel free to do so and ask Sandy directly.
Sandy, this is Sandy Conrad. Who checks the fact checks?
Who checks the fact check? Well, that's a good question. So a lot of things depend on reputation. Library organizations do keep an eye on these things, but one of the things that I pointed out in the Snopes, and you can look at with other articles as well, is can you see where they got their information? Are their sources provided? And that provides the fact check.
Okay.
And so it's up to us as well to, check to make sure that they are sourcing their information, that it can be checked.
Okay. Thank you.
Sandy, I have a question for you. My father was actually a journalist, and there are times I wish he was alive today so I could ask him this question myself. Why do they print the story on the front page? And if it turns out to be wrong, they print the retraction on page 27.
That must be Anne.
I mean, shouldn't there be a front page story for retractions?
I would agree with you there, because when the retractions are buried, that and again, it's like that true sandwich. What do you remember most? And there have been, I believe, lawsuits where criminal cases where somebody's picture was published on the front page, and then when they were found innocent, it's buried in the back and nobody sees that. And again, tracking through on that. And that's why I found that one site from that had the daily fact check, kind of a good place to just kind of scroll through, maybe a couple times a week, just to see what news had I heard that maybe I hadn't seen that correction.
Well, there's the old saying, once spoken can never be taken back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you'll also find that your mainstream news will it's a big deal for the Washington Post to find that the New York Times had an error, and vice versa. But that actually benefits all of us when they when they are fact checking each other.
It's like the Pentagon Papers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And also finding a couple sources for news on the ground of things that are happening with protests, and is something really a riot? What is going on? And so watching some stuff live, it helps to have an idea of who it is you're following, and keep track of things that way. So there's a lot of rabbit holes you can go down, but it's important to keep informed. And a book and a podcast called The View from Somewhere, Journalistic Objectivity. Yeah, and when I was looking up the code of ethics, I found it interesting that, and I contacted Fox at the time, I can locate no code of ethics for Fox News.
You're surprised?
Um, I was hoping that there was something there. The Breeze does it. The JMU Breeze has a code of ethics that I could locate. Um, and so that is something that, yeah, if we went back to the Ad Fontes site, that yeah, the prevalence of Fox News with where it's located on bias and reliability of information is something that is truly concerning.
Yeah. So I get most of my news from Bloomberg, The Atlantic, and The Economist.
Yeah, I'll be honest, the Bloomberg surprised me a little bit when I saw that placement there.
No, it didn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, it's a source I haven't used because I had a preconceived notion that it would not be an unbiased. And that that chart does change. They keep that up to date. When you go to the site, you can look back through previous iterations and see what news organizations have changed. They've also added a feature where they will rate certain articles as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good one.
Sandy, I do want to thank you. I've been thinking all this time. I think you know about LLI, but we are a learning community. And that's one thing that we all have in connection is that we have a love of learning. And just thank you for sharing these digital literacy tools to help us evaluate information. We are probably collectively more avid consumers of information, I imagine, than the general public, but helping us be mindful of assessing not just our own bias and how we think about and collect information and where we curate that information from, but how we control the spread of information and perhaps misinformation unknowingly. Really appreciate you sharing these tools with us. We will make them available online along with the recording. And I do want to mention to people while everyone's connected, I know as we get toward the end of the presentation, we sometimes sign off, not all at once, but sort of a cascading way of leaving. I want to mention next week, next Wednesday on 9/23, our next Zoomtime Knowledge presentation will be titled COVID-19 in Perspective. And fortunately, it builds off of some of the things Sandy has mentioned to us today. That presentation will be provided by two JMU faculty members, Dr. Audrey Burnett and Dr. Chris Burnson. Audrey works in public health. Chris works in the Department of Chemistry, and they will be looking at what do we know about COVID-19, how does it spread, who does it affect, and they will be looking at where can we find and assess reliable sources of information. So the information you have here today, that will help with some of that, but you will hear that same message echoed next week during our next Zoomtime Knowledge presentation. All information about that and future presentations and how to register is at our website, www.jmu.edu/LLI.
Yeah, I did also notice that the public library had a number of good sources for COVID information as well that they had collected under their online resources. So with health information, it is literally life or death to make sure that you have accurate information.
Yeah, that's great. And Sandy, it's one of those things again that you remind me. I visit the library, the public library system more frequently, particularly now that my kids are spending more time at home and they just want new reading material. But all the resources that our public libraries make available to us as a public And there's always new things I'm finding that I didn't know that the public library either provided or, like you mentioned, they serve as a good source of curation.
Yes, and yeah, JMU Libraries is also another great source of online information as well.
Well, with that, Cindy, I'll say thanks again. And everyone, we hope that you're remaining safe and well out there. And we
Oh,
look forward to connecting with you again next week.
thank you. And I apologize for the puppy escape, but thank you all very much. I enjoyed this.
Have a great day.
Bye.